Welcome back on Gaming. This is Devin, and I'm still here at Universal Studios Orlando for Hollywood Horror Nights. And I mean, one of the main reasons why I want to come down here was because they had The Last of Us as a haunted house here, which I was very excited for. I mean, along with all the other haunted houses that they had and food and such. But in this video, I'm just going to go ahead and talk about The Last of Us. And I mean, they had several different things, Last of Us related. So I mean, there's a lot to talk about with that. But, just going to go ahead and talk about the merchandise, the food booths, the haunted house, and then something that I did in addition, which was called Unmasking the Horror, where you just go ahead and go through a haunted house with a tour guide and the lights are on. And I'll go ahead and show some photos I was actually able to take of, in this video as well. So I'll go ahead and check that out. But aside from that, let's go ahead and get started with the merchandise. So for the merchandise, they basically had sort of in a way two different kinds of things. So they had, of course, the Joel, Ellie, and clicker design, and then they also had just like a clicker design as well. They had t-shirts, sweatshirts, coasters, glass, drinkware. And that's pretty much it, to be honest. I mean, Stranger Things and Chucky had a lot more, but, too bad I didn't do a little bit more for The Last of Us. But, it's a shame in that way, but, I mean, what they did have was really awesome. Everybody was very into it because a lot of the stuff was selling out as well. But, yeah, I mean, I just wish they did a little bit more merchandise-wise. But regarding the food, they of course had two different areas where they had food booths. The food booths looked phenomenal. I mean, they looked like they were just, ripped out of The Last of Us. They had this one section on sort of the street where you can go ahead and, they had sort of two different parts where you can grab your food from. And then, of course, they had a spot in the front where you can go ahead and pay for it, of course. And just that whole section there looked very detailed. It looks like these old buildings that were sort of repurposed to go ahead and sell food at, and had the Firefly symbol on a lot of the stuff there too. And yeah, I mean, just looked very detailed. Then they had this other section a little ways in sort of the alley, and they just did a really great job at making the whole alley look Last of Us related. And so they had a place where you go ahead and order your food up in the front that looks just sort of like a shack. Then they had the Fedra flag hanging up on the top, which looked like a very good, looked very detailed. And then, of course, you go down the sort of the alleyway, and you see crates, barrels, you see tarps, you see a Firefly symbol on the one of the doors. You see some of that graffiti on there about seeing the light, probably from a Firefly. And then you go ahead to the rations booth where you can go ahead and pick up your food. And just like I said, everything looked very detailed and cool of that. It sort of was like a quarantine looking area too. But I mean, I think the food booths was one of the coolest things of this event for The Last of Us. And then, of course, they had the food there, which the food, I mean, I only had one thing as of this moment, which was a potato wrapped around a stick with mushrooms on it, which I thought was very good as well. But, they had something called like an infected corn dog. They had sort of like a spiked coffee, and then they had the left behind ravioli that sort of came like in a, I don't know, sort of like this can. And I mean, it looked pretty cool, and people were keeping the can, and people were walking around with those raviolis too. And yeah, I mean, the food that I had was good, but I'll probably go ahead and grab a little bit more of it before I leave here, and that. But then next, we have basically the main event, which of course is a haunted house. The haunted house was phenomenal. I think they did a really good job with the detail of it. They did a really good job just making it just like Chapter 5 of The Last of Us, when they're in Pittsburgh. I think it was a very good idea that they just kept it towards that time frame, just because, or that part, because there was so much to it. It was a very, I think it was a pretty long level in that, and yeah, I mean, I think they did a very good job with just showing you that whole level, and yeah, they showed a lot of that level, and it was in a big soundstage, so they were able to make the haunted house pretty big. So, and they took full advantage of it too, because they had two full-size vehicles in there. They had the truck that Joel drove and crashed into the supermarket, and then they also had a squad car in there too, which, you know, those are pretty big, and, you know, just to show like sort of the size of how big that haunted house was too. But yeah, I mean, they had they basically started off just as the beginning of that chapter with the convenience store, you know, run in, and then of course they have the sort of like where they show the scavengers. The scavengers are coming at you, clickers are coming at you, runners, and then also the bloaters as well. And one of my sort of things I was not too excited for, or just a little bit worried with this haunted house before actually going into it, is I thought you were just going to see, you know, Joel and Ellie go against these kinds of things, or go against like clickers and scavengers and that. But no, it was actually, you sort of seemed like the main character as you were walking through this haunted house. You just saw Joel and Ellie every which way. You didn't see them actually that much even in a haunted house. So I thought it was very cool that, you know, runners were actually coming after me, and then and stalkers too. But yeah, I mean, just overall, I think they did a phenomenal job with you know, what they did put in it, just sort of the variety, and in that for the haunted house, just because, you know, they also had the section of sort of the overgrown area of the infected, so they sort of like sprayed water at you too in that spot, and then that's when you started hearing the clicker sounds. And, you know, it's just I would say of the haunted houses, that was probably like one of the more intense in a way. I don't know necessarily if I would say that if, you know, you didn't watch The Last of Us or play The Last of Us, if you'd have the same opinion, but just, you know, hearing those clicker sounds. Yeah, and especially one of the funniest parts of that whole section that they had was that they just had this one spot, and it wasn't meant to scare you on purpose, but all they had sitting there was just a generator. And of course, if you've played the game, you remember how that generator area or section was. But yeah, I mean, it did a phenomenal job. Like I said, they had a bloater in there at the ending of it, which, you know, the bloater looked amazing, and, you know, it's just really awesome seeing this in a haunted house. You know, you playing The Last of Us, then watching The Last of Us as a TV show, and now actually being fully immersed into The Last of Us. But yeah, I would say probably one of my favorite haunted houses of this event was probably The Last of Us house, just because, you know, like I said, it was pretty scary to an extent, and it was just very detailed and just beautiful inside that house. But yeah, and then sort of to add on to that, the next morning after experiencing the haunted house, I went on the Unmasking the Horror, which you go through a haunted house with the lights on, and you get a tour guide that will answer any of your questions there for you. And I just want to go ahead and sort of note the things I found interesting that, you know, we either saw or that he talked about. So a couple things here is that they sort of showed how they what kind of scares they did and how they sort of did it, whether, like, you know, they had like a door that they come out of, or, you know, they press a button or something to make the sound come out and that. So, I mean, it was pretty cool seeing that. Yeah, like I was saying, is that they showed the two full-size vehicles in there, showing how big the soundstage is that they were using, and of course, you know, just showing you these two vehicles in there. Then there's like a bathroom section in the haunted house. So they basically talked about how, you know, they made it sort of smell like a bathroom. Yeah, and then also they showed that Joel. There was this part where Joel was in a house up on like the second level of it, and he had to get all harnessed up. He said, the tour guide said that they had to get him all harnessed up. So it was just very interesting that how I guess far they go to try to go into just try to how much they do for some of these haunted houses, like that you have to have one of your employees get in a harness. So yeah, and it was a really cool part of the haunted house as well. So but and then also as we were walking, you can see like sort of the dead bodies on the ground and that, and some of the dead bodies had the firefly pennants on them, so that was a pretty cool nod to the video games. And then also they had this part, if you remember, in the game where the scavengers sort of just put dead bodies in an area and then basically burn them. So they sort of showed us that like underneath the dead bodies of that, they had a light shine up, and it made it look really like a fire in that. And I mean, that part of it was cool and interesting. They showed us about that, but they used the same thing on the bloater. So the bloater was sort of like lit up too, which was pretty awesome, because that bloater looked really awesome, and acted exactly like a bloater as well. But and then the last interesting thing that he noted was that Neil Druckmann, of course, with The Last of Us and Naughty Dog, he was at Hollywood Horror Nights, or Halloween Horror Nights, that opening night in Orlando, and he also mentioned how Neil Druckmann was really the reason this haunted house came to be, just because he reached out to Universal to go ahead and make this haunted house. So, good job, Neil, because I think they did a phenomenal job with this house, and like I said, one of the better haunted houses of this event. But yeah, and I'll show some photos throughout this video as well. But anyways, thank you so much for watching the video. If you have any kind of questions, concerns, I don't know, whatever you want to talk about, do it in the comments. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you soon. Bye.